Good day, everyone. I'm here with Marc Johnston talking about marriage. Marc Johnston and his partner, Heather Choate, are international marriage experts. They've been featured on Fox, Yahoo, First for Women, CBS, and have helped thousands of people around the world save their marriage. Considered the ICU for marriage, their method is radically different than traditional counseling, and they're here to share some of their secrets with all of you. So, Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell me about this ICU for marriage. What does that mean?
Well, the thing is, we've kind of created a bit of a niche in the market, and the vast majority of the people that we help are individuals who are trying to patch together their marriage when their spouse is already starting to head out the door. So what we end up doing is, I talk with these individuals. I kind of help them to identify, okay, what's really driving their spouse away, and I give them tips on how to cool that off and how to rebuild connection. Even if their husband or wife is saying, "Hey, we got a divorce." So this is why it's the ICU. People are in it's a marriage crisis situation in most all cases that we deal with.
Well, interesting. Yeah, I could have used that 15 years ago. My wife passed away, but I was married for 12 and a half years, and it was a pretty rocky road. And I certainly could have used some kind of counseling from a marriage counselor.
This is not an easy period for a lot of people. Most, it's not a everyday sort of thing where you say, hey, my marriage might be ending. And people have found it immensely helpful to just kind of have a decent direction to go in a situation that they've never really encountered.
Yeah, it's not like you receive training in school about how to manage a marriage, right?
I did, but
most of us.
Yeah, most people have not. No.
Yeah, I actually got married on the third date, literally on the third date. And
oh, wow.
I asked her to marry me, and we got married that night.
I've heard some really fast courtships, but I think you might actually have the record there for me. I don't know if I've ever heard 3 dates and a proposal. So
proposal and an acceptance and putting together the wedding and the whole thing all in the same day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was
that's interesting because, I'm just going to, some statistics here, something like that, a very short courtship generally is not statistically favorable for a long-term relationship. But you said you lasted 12 years, which you actually would have gotten over that hump there. So it must have been, at least in some ways, a good match.
Well, she got sick about 2 or 3 years into it, and it became very sick, and I wasn't about to walk out on somebody who was that sick. She didn't have...
So this is not really about it being a good match. There was extra things outside of the marriage that really led to to what happened.
Yeah, it would have gone to divorce, but there,
of course,
I'm not going to walk out on somebody who I have to change her IVs every day.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
What are you gonna do if you got any honor or responsibility, right?
Well, yeah, of course. If you've, within a few years, here you had basically made the commitment to, for better or for worse, you're gonna stick around. And it's honestly, Richard, not everyone thinks that way. So it's commendable.
Yeah, and my advice to anybody would be, don't get married on the third date.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So in that case, if we'd come to you, say after a year and said, and I'd said, I want to divorce this woman, or she said, I want to divorce this man, or whatever, what would you have done?
Well, as you were describing, there was other circumstances going on, like she got sick. But even if that was going on, we can kind of go through both scenarios, whether that was going on or not. But, typically I like to look at, okay, well, what are the active pain points? Like what's actively causing people to come apart? I think that's always a great place to start. You need to eliminate those pain points. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily create a good relationship. Like my neighbor, I'm honestly like, I talk very deeply with people, but I'm not a very social person. So like, I don't really know my neighbor that well. I don't have any problems with them, but I don't have a good relationship with them. I'm not close. And the same sort of thing with a marriage. You can eliminate problems, but then you need to say, okay, well, how do you build up that connection again? And what's preventing this other person who's leaning away from the marriage to sit down and even make some small commitments or consider what's going on. Uh, it's really different couple to couple. Some couples, it's about rebuilding trust because there's been some infidelity. Other couples, it's because that they've lost love. There just isn't that love anymore, and we need to examine what happened there, and why isn't why isn't there this love, and why isn't the person considering rebuilding that? Other situations, people get into these midlife crises, or fall into depression, and they blame the marriage, and it's really different depending on what the problem is, how you might approach it.
Yeah, ours got so bad where we started half jokingly talking about, you have to sleep here and I have knives, which was something she would say, or watch out for the poison. And
so it sounds to me like, even though that's joking, it sounds to me like there was it became acceptable to have some amount of contempt between the two of you, some amount of, like you're like joking that, hey, I might do you some harm, which really tells me
it was her to me. I didn't do that to her. She became very bitter for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, that would be what I would call contempt then. And I don't know if you're familiar with other big names in terms of relationships, but one of the biggest names out there is John Gottman, who's really famous for his research in marriages. He got famous basically being able to predict pretty accurately who would stay together and who would divorce eventually. And he had these predictors, the four horsemen of divorce, one of the big ones being contempt.
Yep.
Is there a persistent negative view of the other person? And that,
yeah, especially after it got told by her she had an affair, and she didn't care what I thought about it. So it was interesting. It's an interesting thing. I mean, obviously you're not here to psychoanalyze me in the marriage, but I just thought it was a good example for you.
Yeah, big can of worms there. I mean, one, first you're like, hey, we're thinking about divorce. What do we do about this? But yeah, then we add contempt into the mix. We add affairs into the mix. And, my philosophy is that there's always something that can be done to improve the relationship. Even if we're accepting that it might not get to the point where they reconcile. And for some people, that's enough. If they can at least get along enough, to perhaps co-parent well together, or because there's some vague desire to remain in contact. Sometimes we have to just settle for those smaller goals, but yeah, always something that can be done, I think.
Yeah. It was an interesting situation in my life. I'm kind of glad it's over. But I learned a lot. But in any event, that's probably on the far end of things that you deal with, although you probably deal with ones where both married people are at each other's throats. With me, it was just her at my throat.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, though, I think a lot of the people that I do talk with are more that one-sided because it takes a certain someone to approach a professional and say, hey, I want to fix my marriage. Well, it typically means that they still have some feelings for their partner. And, you'd actually be surprised how often I get into this, where it's just one person has built up this resentment for their partner, and all of a sudden it comes out, and the client that I'm working with is surprised at the state of it when it's really been building up for some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did do counseling, and that I got that surprise. It was very interesting. Like, whoa.
No, that's common. I tend to see that a little bit more with women, mm-hmm. Where they make an emotional decision and they sit on that for a while. Not sure what it is specifically about women, but I will see things like that, or they start planning their exit strategy way in advance before they actually let their spouse know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was also Guatemalan, and she had a somewhat different approach to life than I was born in California. So there was some cultural differences that made it a little rough too. I'm sure you've dealt with that.
Richard, you're hitting all the marks that just kind of statistically point to not as likely. Yeah. The differences in values or culture is, people can get over that. And this is nothing against, say, interracial marriage, intercultural marriage, but, there are certain values, and if those values are different, you're stacking the numbers against you. Even within, like, the same culture, you might have different values. My wife and I were both we're both Caucasian, come from similar religious backgrounds, but have different values, and there's sometimes even clashes between us, even though I work with people on marriages and relationships every day. So it's just, that's another just factor that that statistically doesn't favor a long-term relationship.
Well, an example would be as a Californian, my approach, and as a man probably, I tend to be overt. If there's a problem, I want to solve it. I want to talk about it. I want to get it done. She was covert. So she would hint. She would drop hints. And I didn't pick up on them at all. And that just infuriated her. Like, why are you so stupid that you can't figure that out after weeks of trying to make me figure it out? It's like, why didn't you just tell me you wanted that?
Well, and that's
it's a cultural thing.
Well, I see that among a lot of cultures though. And it is a problem. It's kind of this assumption that if you don't know what's going to make me happy, you must not love me. When really the factor is you're expecting the other person to read your mind and then are upset when they don't guess it correctly. And it's just, I talk to people about this all the time. It's much better just to, clearly state what you want. But if your wife didn't want to work things out or didn't want to accept that that's the better route, then, well, there you have it.
It made things rough. Everything was always fine. The doom word, I'm fine. You're doomed. So it just became interesting. It was a good learning experience. I think it was very painful. We had a stepson, her son also, which he complicated the mix because he was very hostile towards me. I was the enemy from the second we married. I got him at 14. Bad age.
Oh, Richard, you just keep ticking those boxes. So blended families, once again, like nothing against blended families, but it is another stressor that tends to not favor. And so when you stack all these things, I can see why there might have been problems. Yeah,
and he never had a father. His father left very early before when he was like in his early ones. So he basically grew up with his mother, and I came in, and I'm the other man, I guess, and that caused a lot of stress. And then the illness helped also, or didn't help.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Adding extra stress onto an already stressed relationship is not going to be a good situation. Yep.
So that sounds like that's the kind of thing you deal with all the time.
Oh yeah, that's my bread and butter. That's every day for me.
Now you say you're the ICU for marriages. So if we'd have come back to the question, if we'd have come to you, how would you have handled us like an ICU? What would you have done?
Well, I'm going to treat this a little bit like you actually are coming here with your wife. So I'm wondering here in this hypothetical situation, is your wife actually interested in making any changes, or are you just coming to me by yourself? Does that make a difference?
We would be coming together, but she would be coming under protest. That's the way we went in the counseling sessions.
All right. So right off the bat, I would be looking at this as a problem with motivation. And I just know that if I'm having to fight someone on a goal, that the likelihood that they're going to actually follow through with any suggestions that I have would be next to nothing. So I'd be looking to establish right off the bat, what would your wife actually be interested in fixing here? And I would start off with her complaints. So if she's saying, okay, Richard is this terrible husband who doesn't understand understand me at all, I'd say, okay, well, what do we actually want that to be changed? Is that something that you're interested in? And so, like I said, we would be starting off, if the two of you were there together, really looking to see what actually provides motivation and breaking that down. A lot of times when I encounter these situations, I might even have a spouse who says, well, I just want to be done. Well, that's not an actual goal. And so, even if your wife was saying something like this, oftentimes I'll tell people divorce is not really an end goal. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I think it would be a really good idea to divorce. That sounds like a good life plan for me. They want what divorce actually affords them. And divorce is a means to an end. So maybe they're wanting relief. Maybe they don't want arguments anymore. Maybe they are wanting some freedom or basically they want some respect for some of their choices. And so we look at some of those underlying goals and we see, okay, is there actually any motivation to work through that problem? And typically we can find something that they want to solve, even if the end goal is not reconciliation. And from there, when we solve some of these problems, it becomes easier to go a little bit further and a little bit further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would have had a hard time because for her, everything was fine. So you wouldn't have been able to crack that nut.
Oh no, I would have called her out on something like that. So this is, like I said, Richard, this is my bread and butter. I get people who do not want to talk to me. I get people who are uncomfortable. And I think one of my, not to toot my own horn, but I think one of my big talents is to really put people at ease and make them feel understood.
Well, that's important.
People who are hostile. Yeah, I've had people yelling and screaming at me, and I have them close friends with me, and 10 minutes later. So I don't know. I could break that down, but that's one of the things that I really pride myself in, and who knows? I mean, it's hard to say with your wife having passed, but if she was really resistant, I'd probably move towards meeting with her individually so that I could at least take some of the pressure away from having to answer the right things in front of you, or
of course
some conflict. But
that would have been fine with me because I just wanted to stop getting attacked, basically. Sure. But yeah, it was in hindsight, because I've been through therapy on it, and a lot of the pain points are handled, so I can talk about it without getting emotional, and that wasn't true a few years ago. Mm-hmm. The counselor was lost. He'd never.
Here's the thing, Richard, is most people will just go to their local counseling office and say, "Hey, I need marriage counseling," and I'm going to just say, I went to school for psychology, and you know what? Getting my, working towards that clinical psychology degree, I was not required to do anything in terms of couples counseling. I elected to. There was 2 classes that were offered, which is hardly enough to do that, because for the most part, most general therapists or counselors, most of their client load is not couples counseling. So, I decided early on that this is what I wanted to focus on. And so I had to do a lot of my own research. I had to do a lot of my own studying. And, so I have my library of books that, I would never have really even needed to under normal circumstances. And that's what a lot of people go to, is that situation. Someone who says, "Hey, I'm a counselor," but most of the time they're dealing with people who have depression or anxiety issues, the very common mental health problems.
Right, which I don't.
Yeah. So the approach for, say, relationships and couples, saving a marriage is not the same sort of. Sure, there's some crossover. But it's like going to your general practitioner versus and I'm going to get this wrong. I'm hoping I'm using the right term, oncologist for cancer.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You got it right. Yeah.
Okay. If you have cancer, do you want to go to the general practitioner or do you want to go to the oncologist? And, most people are going to say they want to go to the oncologist.
I usually skip the GP if I think I know what's wrong. So
yeah, exactly.
I understand. Yeah. So that's fascinating. You must run into some very interesting situations with marriages, some which probably are easy to solve and some which probably you couldn't solve.
Yeah. In terms of crazy situations, I think I've been doing this long enough that I think I've heard most everything at this point. And yeah, you're right. There are some things that are, I hear it and they say, "Oh, this is so terrible," and we're at each other's throats. And then I hear the problem. I'm thinking, "Oh, well, this is just like a regular Tuesday for me. This is an easy thing to solve."
Exactly.
And other people, I'm like, "Oh man, this is going to be a challenge here." And yeah, you're right.
And you need armed guards in there to keep them separated.
oh yes.
Figuratively, anyway.
Yes.
You're like, where are the guards? Where's the bulletproof glass?
Well, and so for the most part, though, that's what people are coming to me for. I'm the mediator. I'm the one that
Right.
allows them to talk and not, stab each other in the eyes.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You must get some anger issues that are phenomenal, I'm sure, because it builds up over time.
Oh yeah. That's yes. Well, and here's the part where people get really confused is, I'll get a fair amount of people who say, I'm trying to help my spouse. I'm trying to fix things. I'm trying to even support them. And then they're reacting in anger. And that's what really throws a lot of people for a loop is, anger when it doesn't really make logical sense for there to be anger. And luckily enough, I've taken enough time figuring all of these things out. I write a lot of training material for the couples to look over. And I mean, this is, once again, it's just part of our course, dealing
Sure.
with things like this.
Sure. So they go through a course?
Yeah, this is part of the reason why we are different. So, typically if you were looking for couples counseling on a regular basis, you'd go see them maybe once a week, maybe once every other week. And because we're often dealing with these marriage crisis situations, it needs a little bit more attention. So I typically am talking to my client. And in addition to that, I run group calls. Either myself or one of my team members is there every day of the week for like a couple hours to just answer questions in case you've gotten into a fight. We're there. And then on top of that, we have a lot of trainings, like what to do if your spouse is dealing with an affair, what to do if they don't want to talk to you. And, so it's really easy for me to say, hey, here are the principles. I want you to go watch this next time when we come back together. Now that you know the principles of how to deal with this, I actually want to apply it to your specific situation. It makes it really good for holding our clients accountable and making sure that they're doing some work to learn the skills themselves.
Right. But it sounds like the basic foundation is that the two want to solve it, or believe there's a problem.
No, like we actually come at with the assumption that only one person wants to fix the marriage. That's like I said, that's why we're the ICU. That's why this is the niche that we've created. And so we look at, basically, I would say 95% of the people starting out with us are, one of the spouses is wanting separation, divorce, or something like that. And we're looking to put out that fire and then rebuild.
Mm-hmm. So at least one of them wants, obviously to come to you. Somebody has to want to come to you.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And that means they want to fix it somehow if they're seeing a problem. But the other one, it sounds like, probably doesn't want to be there, probably thinks it's over, or they're happy. As in the case of my wife, she was fine with the situation. I was the one who was getting attacked or wasn't fine with it. So I'm not sure which one of us would be the one you would focus on.
Well, in this hypothetical situation, I'd be talking to you, and we'd be looking at figuring out how to settle the problems that your wife is bringing to the table. Now, she says she's fine. I would just say bluntly that that's a bold-faced lie, and that's part of the problem. Very likely, if I were to assess just from the limited information, I'd say that the pattern in your relationship is that there's resentment that builds up. Your wife wouldn't talk about it, and we'd be examining why. And then it builds up to the point where it explodes and she gets upset. And then here you are, you're left confused. Why is my wife so upset when, to her, it's been obvious that you've been hurting her this whole time.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's almost certainly what was going on. Is there were little things that I was missing because she expected me to catch hints and clues and things. That was the way she operated. And so I didn't.
Then we'd be looking at other things because your wife was aiming for divorce. We'd be looking at, a common problem here is, let's say that you were trying to fix it. I'm sure you'd probably get a lot of anger and, resistance to you trying to fix the marriage. Very common problem that we deal with. And a lot of times the solution is to let go of trying to fix the marriage and focus much more on the relationship. Does it actually feel good to be around each other? Because here's the thing, your wife probably was, for some time not feeling loved or heard or respected or whatever the lack was there. And if you go into say, hey, let's fix this, you're not gonna have a whole lot of motivation. Two things keep people together, two types of commitment. One of them is all the things like marriage vows, having children, time together, commitment, stigma against marriage, things outside of the marriage. The much more powerful thing that keeps people together is, does it actually feel good to be around each other? And until you have that, it's very unlikely that your wife would have considered at all to stay together.
Interesting. Very interesting stuff. Yeah. I don't know that I don't think I could do your job.
Oh, yeah. I hear that often enough. I'm not sure how I do my job either.
Yeah, because you're going to hit all these emotional highs and lows and everything in between.
Oh, yeah. I'm dealing with people crying uncontrollably. I'm dealing with people who are, that tension is palpable, in the session, anger is there. And, it takes a lot on my end to make sure that I have those emotional walls up, as odd as that might sound, or just being able to guard myself against the extreme emotion that I'm seeing on a constant basis. Yes. Did you ever
have anything turn physical in a counseling session?
Well, no, because we were just talking about this just before, and this is of course over, I conduct my sessions over Zoom. So I'm seeing people all over the world.
Okay.
And oftentimes, even if I do have a couple sitting with me, they might be in separate locations connected.
I see.
Over Zoom. So,
because you may run into situations of like a battered wife or something. I'm sure you've had those happen.
And that's a different situation entirely. If I'm encountering something with a actual abuse going on, I do not typically recommend reconciling under those.
That would make sense.
Yeah, it's more than how do we peacefully exit this without further damage.
Yeah, or how do we get you out of danger? Even
exactly. Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, how do we stop the damage from happening altogether?
For the most part, I'm not seeing that though, because we a lot of our advertising, a lot of what we're doing to draw clients in, it's talking about saving the marriage. And for the most part, if you are this battered wife, probably not on the top of your priority list.
If you can even go there, because there's the husband might beat you if you didn't, or the wife. Sometimes it happens the other way. Sometimes the husband is the battered husband.
That's true. It is true. I actually, I do actually have clients even currently where that's the situation.
Yeah.
Well, and like I was just saying, hey, I don't help those people. It's not just to clarify, it's not at the level where we would say, okay, this is abusive, but it's approaching that level. And, we do have to have talks about boundaries and respect and whatnot.
Of course. Yeah. Our marriage never got physical. We just didn't like each other after a while. There was nothing to do about it because she was sick. So there you go. So fascinating. Yeah. It sounds like you could have certainly have helped us back 25 years ago.
Sure hope so.
Then you probably also run to codependencies a lot.
Yes. Where typically what that will look like is the client who's approaching saying, they're going to present much more desperate. Their spouse is pulling away, and we have someone who's so desperate, so distraught over, considering that their husband or wife could possibly leave them. And then the case there is, like you said, there's a problem with codependence. Like just the idea, could you actually be happy without this person is hard for them to fathom, but it's needed. And a lot of times I'll talk to clients about, okay, well, what would be a healthy foundation for a relationship if you were to get back together? And, certainly a codependence or this situation where you couldn't possibly be happy without them is not a healthy foundation.
No, of course not. That's actually very unhealthy.
Yeah.
It's almost a mental illness.
Yes. And so we would have to talk about in those cases, how do you be happy without your partner, even if we're aiming to fix the relationship.
Yeah, because it's important to spend time apart. That's something I found it is important to have space.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
and which was one of her areas of contention, by the way, is I needed space and she didn't want to give it. So it became interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there needs to be room for individual interests, hobbies, to a certain extent, friends, so that when you do come together, there's something to talk about,
Yep.
something to share with the other person.
Yep. Yep. But yeah, this is fascinating stuff. I think that marriage and relationships are important and they're close. So of course you can get in each other's face
Mm-hmm.
and have issues, and you don't want to hurt the other person, so you start not talking about what's going on, and then it just builds up and builds up and builds up until finally the pressure cooker goes off, right?
Yeah, I often will tell people that, the two things that will kill a relationship is if you have no ability to be open about problems, or if you have no avenue to be open about what's wanted either. And just like you said, if you don't have those things, it will, the pressure will build up and it will explode or just die, essentially.
Let me ask you a hypothetical here. Suppose you had a couple come in and you finally got one of them off to the side because you realized that one needed needed to be separated, and she or he, whichever, said they had an affair or were gambling or had some serious problem that they were not telling their spouse. Would you recommend that they tell their spouse, or would you recommend that they solve their problem?
Well, first I would be wondering why can't they share that with their spouse?
Okay.
Because that would actually be a huge part of that problem to begin with.
Okay.
I will. It's not uncommon for me to encounter spouses who have some sort of addictive problem,
Of course.
and a big thing that fuels addictive behavior is that secrecy. Like this idea, I can't share this with my spouse. It's too much for them to handle. They're going to leave me. And even getting, so where I would get to is, I do think that would eventually need to be discussed, but we would have to need to work through why can't it be shared in the first place.
So you wouldn't right away have them just disclose everything they've done to each other.
No, I think that would be dumb, honestly. Just not because it shouldn't be shared. It's, you want to be able to share it in a healthy manner.
So you got to build up to it and get some affinity between the two before you
Well,
do
yeah,
that.
I mean, the whole reason that this hypothetical person can't share is, excuse me, it would be a major problem in the relationship anyway. So this would be all in the same path of fixing this hypothetical couple, is being able to be open enough to share problems. I'll sometimes talk about levels of intimacy, and ideally you want to be very close, emotionally intimate with your spouse. Well, level one, we have basically an intimacy that you might have with a cashier, like I call it the cashier exchange. You might wish them wish them a good day, but you don't really care whether they have a good day or not. Most people.
Sure.
Level two, you'd have like a business or facts. You can talk with your coworker about what's going on at work. Level three, you have an ability to share opinions about things outside yourself. What was Tom doing at work, and is he cheating on his wife, and do I like this show or not? Level four is more interpersonal and personal opinions. What do I like about you? What do I like about myself? Can we share those things? And level five is what we're talking about, and why this is a hard thing to share is, can you share struggles and weaknesses and make that a connecting experience? If you can, that's a very intimate relationship.
And if you can't, then you're really not at level 5.
No, yeah, you're not. Like, one of the things I really appreciate about my marriage is my ability to share those things with my wife. I know that I can go to her and say, hey, I'm really struggling here, and I can expect that she's going to be there to support me. So this makes for a very open relationship where, we can ebb and flow, and we can have struggles, and we know that it's not going to be a deal breaker.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a very good relationship.
Well, thanks. I think so myself.
Yeah, let's get your wife in the room and find out what she thinks. No kidding.
Honestly, she's involved in our business here and there, and I'll often have her on the podcast, and we'll talk about our relationship all the time
Cool.
because we're very proud of it. We say we've been married for 15 years, we have 5 kids now, and we say, hey, we've been through some rough times, and you know what? We know some stuff. I think we do know some things.
Yeah,
Uh,
my sister has one of those marriages. She's been married to her husband for 30 years, I think. They have 5 kids, one autistic, and she owns a school with 4,000 students. I mean, she's fantastic. And I remember going to a get together with some of her family, and they were a university. One of them was graduating from university, and just looking around and thinking, wow, this family is actually getting along. This is weird, because
yeah.
I'd actually never seen that before.
Well, I like to, I'm not going to take all the credit. I think my parents were a really great example. They've been now married for 55 years. I grew up with a family of 8 kids. I think we all get along really well. And so, that example there, I think really set a precedent.
Cool.
Family was really important to us. And so, my wife and I have really kept that up.
Yep. Yep. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Do you have any closing remarks? How do people get hold of you? The usual questions.
Yeah. The best way to get a hold of us, you can always go to our website. It's www.highthrivecoaching.com. Some really easy entry points. If you're just looking for some information, we have do-it-yourself courses, with some tips, tricks, things to look over. We do have a Facebook group called The Thriving Marriage. On there, I have weekly trainings or podcasts. You can also look us up on YouTube.
Nice.
That way as well. So the podcasts are there. So we do offer, as should be abundantly clear at this point, we do offer the one-on-one traditional sort of coaching or counseling sort of stuff, but we run the gamut, have lots of different services if that's not your cup of tea.
Nice. Nice.